We are starting with case number 2966, Caitlin B. Wozniowski, 61 Corrigan Street. Mr. Flanagan.
Mr. Guider, members of the board, Gilbert G. Flanagan, 21 South Main Street, Southampton, 10:21 p.m. on July 27th.
You're not close to the record, Gil. You're not close to the record, so relax.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick. This is an application that was filed originally for your May meeting, and it was adjourned for all purposes because before we got to the actual hearing, there were some comments we heard from neighbors about how the proposed house was to be oriented. It was originally proposed to be oriented perpendicular to Corrigan Street, and it was felt that that may not be suitable with the surrounding development, so my client went back and redesigned it so that it now faces the street as proposed, as do all the other houses. So what you have before you this evening is an amended site plan and amended elevations that reflect that change, and also as a result of that, in fact, the setback from Corrigan Street was increased slightly from what we applied for, so we need actually less relief than what we originally requested. As you probably also know from reviewing the original application, the property does have an existing residence on it, which enjoys a setback from Corrigan Street of 34.1 feet. The proposed new house would have a setback of 34.5 feet. And in fact, it would have less square footage within the setback than the existing house does. Now, I would note, as I pointed out in the application, that if you were to look at lot size alone under section 116-11.1, the setback for this size lot would be 30 feet, and we would exceed that. So at least on a lot size comparison, we're consistent with that portion of the code, although because of the zoning district in which this property is situated, the requirement is 40 feet. Now, you notice that with the original application I submitted an analysis of all of the other houses on the west side of Corrigan Street, starting one lot in from Hill Street and running all the way up to Bernardine Street. And as you can see from that application, I won't repeat it, the majority of the houses in that area don't conform with the 40-foot setback. Most of them, if not half of them or more, have lesser setbacks than we're proposing or that exist. And just to amplify that, I thought I would give you a Google Earth photograph, excuse me, which shows the subject property with a little red dot on it. I guess I should put it there. It's hard to see. It shows the houses on the west side of Corrigan Street and also the houses on the east side of Corrigan Street in the same area. Now, on that, I'll point out to you that someone might ask, well, why did you pick only the west side of the street for your analysis? Well, if you look at the tax map, which I submitted with the original application, excuse me, and also the aerial photographs, you'll note that the majority of the lots on the east side of Corrigan Street are much deeper. So the situation is drastically different. And in fact, the further north on the west side of Corrigan Street you proceed, the lots there become deeper. There are only, I think, 3 lots on that side of Corrigan Street that meet or exceed the 40-foot setback, and they're all considerably deeper than the subject lot. In fact, when you look at the survey, you'll note that this lot it's very long, but it's not very deep, and it also has an irregular front yard, and that's really what the problem is. In fact, now at the north end of the proposed house, it conforms with the 40-foot setback, whereas the existing house doesn't. And as you proceed to the south, that's when the lot line jogs inward, and that's where the relief is being requested. And here's a little bit of a more close-up view.
Do we see that?
Yes. Here's a little bit of a closer view. Here's the subject house, which I'm pointing here. And the house that would be most directly affected is number 62 Corrigan Street, which is right across the street. And you'll note how deep that lot is and how far back from the street that house is. So I would submit that the lot most directly affected by the application would really not be affected at all. And I have some copies of that to offer on. As I mentioned, as the application is amended, only 100 square feet of the footprint of the proposed new house would encroach on the 40-foot setback, as opposed to 116 feet of the existing house, which now encroaches. As far as GFA is concerned, encroaching into the setback, only 139 square feet of the GFA of the proposed house would encroach. And you say, well, why isn't it double if it's a two-story house? And the reason for that is that the extra 39 square feet are reflected by a bay window, which protrudes from the front. Just to repeat, of the 13 lots we analyzed, 8 of them have a setback of less than 40 feet from Corrigan Street. And in fact, there's one vacant lot, which a number of years ago, and this is all submitted with the original application, this board granted a front yard setback variance to 28 feet from Corrigan Street, and that, as you know, dimensional variances of that nature don't expire. So the majority of lots are non-conforming in terms of that setback. Now, it's important to note that there are no other variances requested. I've submitted some material that Michael Berenger, the architect, provided to me, which indicates that the proposed construction meets the pyramid law. It also meets the new minimum and aggregate side yard setback requirements, which were recently adopted in April. And I think that's about all I have to say at this point. Mr. Berenger is here if you have any technical questions of him.
I have no questions. There's a house on the lot now. It's a very small house. It's been there a long time. And
right. By the way, just for the record, not that it's directly relevant, but this the applicant is Dr. Brown's daughter, and she got the property through an inheritance. So it's a local person, for whatever that's worth.
well, the architect, the lawyer, and the applicant are all former students of mine.
That's right. I was in your first class, so that's another story.
So is Moses.
That's right. What does that make me?
I just missed him by a year or two. You got anything?
No.
Mark?
No. No, very thorough application, particularly the analysis of the character and neighborhood and all the other applications.
You want to do it tonight, or you want to close it for decision?
I think close it for a decision.
That's fine.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
What's next here? On the application of case number 2969, Bell Blanche Trust, 92 Halsey Avenue.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Bill Slight. I'm the architect for the applicant. This is a second hearing on this case. At the June meeting, the board requested that we supply you with an analysis of the neighborhood to demonstrate that this house is in keeping with the character of that area with regard to the diminished front yard setback. What you see being handed out to you before you, and which was entered into your record prior to your work session, is a map of the neighborhood, and the numbered properties on there total 14 properties. And those 14 properties all have front yard setbacks less than the required 25-foot zoning front yard setback. Our application asked for relief for 10 feet from the 25-foot setback. The existing building on the property is non-conforming with regard to that setback. And our proposal is to add a second story to that existing structure over the footprint of the existing structure.
This lot is quite narrow. It's not deep at all, this lot.
No, it's not, and it has quite a small building envelope on
And
it.
it's on a corner, too, which,
It's a corner, so it's challenged by in both regards.
right.
Our application asks for relief for 378 cubic feet of relief, which is, if you look on the diagram that I provided at the last meeting, it's only a little small portion, a little very small triangle which extends into that sky plane.
It is. You see the number, but you have to multiply the three numbers to get that 378. So it's not like it's 100 by
Thank you to
something.
computers.
Anybody got any questions? No. Mark?
No.
Wayne?
Bill, I looked at the plan that you have. Thank you for providing that. I just noticed on an aerial photograph, directly across the street, it appears to be a building that is much less than even your setback.
Yes,
just
that's
wondering
true.
why that's not
There was
on
a
your
building
plan.
across the street that is much less.
So
In
that-
fact, I am the architect for the three houses that are in the final phases of construction at 81, 87, and 93 Halsey Street. And
So that no longer exists?
the three buildings that had, or actually there had been about 6 buildings that had occupied those 3 lots, and now new homes are going in there and in conforming locations.
The only other question I have is, you provided a calculation on the 50% of the expansion of the non-conforming.
Yes, that's
Now,
correct.
it appears your calculation is based on the entire building as opposed to just the portion that is in the non-conforming setback? Just,
In other
I
words,
asked you to look at that, and it's-
I'm not clear about your question.
so the entire house is not non-conforming, a portion of it meets the setback.
Right.
So it's been this board's practice that the 50% would apply to the portion that you're expanding that's already non-conforming,
Oh, I see.
not the entirety of the house.
I
So I think
understand.
your number actually looks larger than what your relief has actually requested. So I just ask you to provide that calculation for the record.
Then that's my misunderstanding of how the.
Yeah, I just need that so that if the board is inclined to grant this, that the relief is properly noted. So my recommendation, if the board,
So is that
you
something,
could
a
close it
calculation
subject to
that I
receipt of that.
that I could submit to you?
You submit to the board and
To the board.
copy,
And
yes.
that's, get it to us like before the work session if you can.
Okay.
So we can close it.
I'd be happy to provide that.
Subject to getting
Yes, all right. Thank you.
Is there anyone out in the audience who'd like to be heard of this application?
I move to close this application subject to provision of requested material.
All in favor?
Thank you for your time.
On the application of case number 2970, 550 and 554 Hill Street, LP, 550 and 554 Hill Street.
The applicant Gilbert G. Flanagan, 21 South Main Street, Southampton. This is a continuing application that was heard at the regular June meeting, and one of the purposes of the adjournment was to submit additional information that was requested by the board. And I also would like to make a summary of those materials that were submitted and make a few additional comments, hopefully short, given the lateness of the hour. I just want to make sure that the record has the information which I submitted in advance of the work session and after the last meeting. I believe Mr. Guzowitz, who wasn't here this evening, asked about a Phase 1 environmental audit of the property. And in fact, one was done for this property, previously submitted to the planning board, but I've also submitted copies of it for the record, which you should have in the file. That was submitted on June 27th. And when you read that, if you've read it through, you'll note that there were no adverse environmental conditions, spills, or anything else of that nature found on the property. There were also questions raised, I believe, by the applicants as to the applicability of Section 116.28C3 of the Village Code, which deals about changes of a non-conforming use, and the ability of the Board of Appeals to grant approval for that. An issue was made about the fact that the code refers to issuance of a certificate of occupancy for a change, but I would hasten to point out, as I'm sure those of you who have been on the board for a while are aware, that this board has a long history of interpreting and acting upon that section. And in such connection, I submitted 2 cases which this board has decided within the last several years, one of which, in fact, is very close in many respects to the subject application, and that is the application of 45 Moses Lane. Just briefly, you may recall, and that case was decided only, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. That involved the abandonment of the Pajak bottling plant on Moses Lane, which was a pre-existing non-conforming business use in a residential zone. And as an exchange for that abandonment, this board granted permission for the applicant to construct a guest house on the property containing 1,222 square feet. The other case I submitted, which deals with and that was done under Section 116.28C3. Another case that's similar to that was the case of 220 Bishop's Lane, and you may remember that as the so-called Rambo application. And as we all know, that was a very pre-existing non-conforming use, and this board granted permission that in exchange for abandonment of that use, it allowed actually multi-family dwellings to be constructed on that portion of the property that was located within the village, the rest of it being in the town. There was a third case I submitted, the Edwards case, which you probably also remember, which doesn't talk so much about 116.28C3, but which contains a very detailed discussion of how this board and the village has interpreted what a guest house is. And that will become relevant in a couple of minutes. Now, I look back through the initial hearings of the Board of Appeals that were started, believe it or not, in 2012. I almost said 1912. And also the various proceedings that were conducted over several years before the Planning Board, particularly in the context of rendering a secret determination. And it appears that the objectants' comments and opposition can be summarized as follows. And by the way, the comments I heard at the last meeting, last month, appeared to be the same as those previously voiced. The first being objection to the so-called number of variances. Now, as you know, my application thoroughly detailed each of the variances we were requesting, and I would stick by that a summary and analysis of those variances that are required for this application. The second comment that we've heard throughout is that the lots that we're proposing to create are undersized, particularly the most northerly lot of the 3 proposed lots. But as you know, this property is bisected by the division line between the R40 district and the R120 district, and the aggregate area of the subject lot is in excess of 120,000 square feet, which means on a yield basis it could accommodate 3 lots of 40,000 square feet. Now, given the design, we decided it would be better for the neighborhood and for the applicant to have the 2 southerly lots larger and the northerly lot fronting on Hill Street smaller. And by the way, that discussion was had before the Planning Board, and the Planning Board's staff advisor at that point, Kathy Eisman, found no environmental or neighborhood reason why that was not an appropriate thing to do. The third thing that seemed to be an issue of concern or complaint by the objectants had to do with the fact that the property is located at the westerly end of the Southampton Village Historic District. Now, during the course of planning board proceedings, if you examine the planning board file, and if you examine the secret determination that the planning board rendered in May, the village historical consultant determined that neither property was contributing to the historic district, and your counsel, or the counsel to the planning board, I should say, at that time advised the planning board that the determination of historical relevance was a matter for local determination, and the planning board, in its secret determination, found that neither property was contributing to the historic district. The next complaint or comment we heard was that the moving business is really, currently is rather a benign use. There's not too much going on there. But that's not to say that that could not change overnight if another tenant came in. And by the way, I verified with the building department that as far as the building department is concerned, that use has not been abandoned. It's still an active use, and Jonathan Foster can provide you something in writing if you want that, but I'll represent to you that he told me that within the last month or two. The final issue that appears to have been raised by the objectants has to do with the subject of the guest houses. And as I mentioned before, this board has had previous occasions to view the subject of guest houses, most recently in the Moses Lane case, and there have been discussions before this board, particularly in the Edwards case, of what a guest house is. And we've heard a comment that if the application were granted, there'd be 5 houses on the property. That's 3 main houses, 2 guest houses, because the northerly lot would not, not accommodate a guest house. A guest house historically, and as defined in the Edwards case, has been deemed by the village to be an accessory use. That is a use that's incidental to the main use. The house would be used by servants, guests, family, tied to the principal dwelling, and not able to be rented to an independent third party. The Edwards case, as you probably know, was decided favorably by this board. The objectants of that case brought an Article 78 proceeding to the Supreme Court. This board's decision was upheld. The objectants appealed that decision to the appellate division, second department. The appellate division affirmed. So as far as I can see, that's pretty much the law as to what guest houses are. Now that was a little different case because we weren't introducing a guest house. That had to do with moving a guest house and expanding it to achieve a greater wetland setback. But the point of it was the discussion of how this village has viewed and does view guest houses. So I would submit that what we have said about guest houses, we're not adding 5 houses, we're adding 3 uses with 2 accessory uses, and I think that distinction is important, especially when you consider that the property in question has 3 uses on it now, 2 residences and the business use. So the total net increase in the number of principal uses would not change by virtue of the subdivision. All that having been said, and as I believe Mr. DePietris may have said in his last meeting ever, where he advised this board, the real issue in this case is whether or not, under Section 116(28)(c)(3), the granting of this application would be beneficial to the neighborhood. And that is what I would ask you to focus on. Now, as we know, and as I've submitted to you, the planning board spent months, in fact, a couple of years reviewing the secret aspect, because this board, you may remember, I think rightly felt that the planning board, since it's a subdivision, should be the lead agency. And if you read the findings in the negative declaration, which you have, you will note all the various areas of potential environmental concern and how the applicant addressed those concerns and how the planning board found that there were no significant adverse environmental impacts from the project. And that vote, by the way, was a unanimous vote of the 4 members present. One other thing I just mentioned, I think I mentioned it before, but the proposed application with the 3 houses and the 2 guest houses would meet the requirements of the Suffolk County Health Department. We would not require any variance relief from them given the density and given the groundwater management zone in which the property is located. The planning board, as I mentioned, has done a tremendous amount of work on this project already. In addition to the negative declaration, I submitted a staff memo that was discussed by the planning board concerning the design of the subdivision about the use of the lot area requirements in section 116.11.1. That was a suggestion that actually came from the planning board staff report, and also the fact of how the two rear yards of the two southerly lots should be aligned with one another. Now, a question may have come up as to whether or not that memo was ever officially adopted or whether it was actually discussed, and I have a copy of the minutes of the planning board of May 31st, 2016, and on page 2 you'll see that that's where it was discussed, so that's where the idea came from. Now, one other thing I will submit, which you should already have, but it's been so many years, maybe I should submit it again. A question again on the effect of the application on the neighborhood and the subdivision. Bear in mind, this was an affidavit prepared by John Blaney, who, as you may know, is a recognized appraiser with offices in West Hampton Beach and who was also a member of the Southampton Town Planning Board. He analyzed the application when it was 4 lots, and he found that, in his professional opinion, the grant of the application would have a beneficial effect on neighboring property values. You have this already, but it's so old you probably don't remember. And some of you, I don't even know, were on the board at the time. But it's important to know that because, as I said a few minutes ago, one of the key things, really the central issue of this case, is to what extent the grant of the application would be beneficial to the neighborhood. I'll close at this point by saying that during the initial application before you and during all of the numerous hearings we had before the planning board, we submitted extensive evidence, environmental and planning evidence into the record, all of which was done by David Emelita, who, as you know, was originally the village planning consultant before the Chicks firm illustriously came on the scene. And we think that those reports, if you examine them, will adequately support our contention that this application, the granting of it, would be a beneficial thing. And with that, I'll sit down if anybody has any comments or if you have any questions. I would hope that, given where this has been and how thoroughly it's been reviewed by the planning board, that at the very least we might be able to, if we can't close it this evening, if we could close it for written submissions only, which is what I would prefer that you did, if that's possible.
Questions?
Wayne,
None at this time.
is there anyone from the audience who wishes to speak to this application?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and board members. My name is Jeff Bragman. I represent Neighbors in Opposition. And when we were last on with this case, the issue was raised about how many variances are required to create these new lots. And I've gone over the attorney's application, and he's listed 10 variances. This is an application that requires, according to the applicant's attorney, 10 separate variances. He describes those as a lot area variance and a lot width variance for lot number 1, a lot area and a lot width variance for lot number 2, and a variance for an accessory house of 1,250 feet, and a variance for having access via a 20-foot right-of-way which provides 0 frontage for the lot on a public street. So that's 100% variance, no compliance with that. And on lot 3, he describes it as requiring an area variance, a lot width variance, a variance for an accessory guest house of 1,250 square feet, and again, that 100% variance for taking access over a right-of-way that isn't wide enough and doesn't have frontage. We think that that's not an accurate count of the variances. And it has to do with this, what I think is really a sleight of hand, actually. to refer the board to use the dimensional setbacks that are listed now currently by lot area. And the reason I call it a sleight of hand is because if the lots were existing, if they were lawfully existing, then I think it would be a logical thing to say, well, let's apply the setbacks that are required by lot area. But the lots are not legally existing, and they're in front of this board asking that the lots be legally existing. And in order to make them legally existing, you have to examine whether or not they do comply with the dimensional setback requirements for the zoning districts that they're located in. These lots are, as the applicant's attorney said, they're divided between the R120 zone and the R40 zone. And the only way to accurately assess the number of variances that they're asking for is to evaluate the lots that they're proposing, which are not yet legal, against the dimensional requirements for the R40 zone and the R120 zone. And if you do that, you come up with a far greater number of variances that this application needs. It needs 25 variances, not 10 variances. And I've charted them, and actually I need to make a correction on the chart because the variances that they're asking for not having frontage on a street, I put down as a percentage variance. But the truth is, since what your code requires is street frontage. A lot, when you create a lot, it's got to have street frontage. None of these lots, except the top lot on Hill Street, have any street frontage. They get to the street by going over a right-of-way on another lot, and that means they have zero street frontage. But when I charted the variances, I compared the width of the right-of-way to the requirement for street frontage. Your code requires 40 feet wide of street frontage, and they have a 20-foot wide or a 22-foot wide road that takes them out. But that doesn't really give them any credit under what your code requires. They have zero street frontage. So they need 100% variance. So I wanted to go through this. I know it's going to be a little hard to sort of do this. I have some of these, but as I said, the street frontage variances are not accurate. But I can talk you through this and say that on the front lot, this is the smallest lot, the R40 minimum front yard setback requirement for a principal building is 60 feet. They're only providing 40 feet, so they need a 33% variance, 1/3 variance.
May I interrupt for a second, Mr. Bragg? Do you have something in writing? Because
yes,
at this late hour, I think any of us to remember what you're saying.
I do.
I would suggest that you provide us something in writing that.
I do. I would like to update it, actually, because of that error on it, but that's the only error on it. So I do have them, and I think they will be helpful. And I know the hour is late, but this is an important case, too. I've spent a lot of time listening to the other case, so I hope I can have a chance to talk to you at length.
You can.
I'm sorry, I know it's very late. It's late for me, too. I didn't have any dinner tonight.
All cases are important.
Thank you. I can give you...
I just think it's easier to follow
It will be.
something in writing while you're discussing all those things.
Yeah, let's let those go around, and then we'll talk.
Jeff, do you have a copy of that?
I do, I'm sorry.
Here you go.
I actually passed that one.
I got mine. I got it. Thanks.
So on page 1 is where I'm starting, and I'm starting with the street side lot. And as you can see, the first variance that's required is for the principal building setback, which is 60 feet in an R40 zone. They only propose 40 feet. That's a 33% variance, which is a significant variance. And the minimum front yard for an accessory building in an R40 zone is 70 feet. They're proposing 50 feet, so that's a 29% variance. In the R120 zone, the 3-acre zone, the minimum front yard setback for a principal building is 80 feet. They're only proposing 40 feet. That's a 50% variance. And in an R120 zone, the minimum front yard for an accessory building is 90 feet. They're only proposing 50 feet. That's a 44% variance. In addition, in order to create this lot, which has about 20,000 square feet, you need a variance from the R120 minimum lot area requirement of 120,000 square feet to take the lot down to 20,000 square feet. That's an 83% variance. That's a very significant variance. In the R40 zone, the minimum lot area is 40,000 square feet. They're only proposing 20,000 square feet, so that's a 50% variance. And the lot lacks the adequate width at the building line required for an R120 zone, which is 200 feet, and they drop it down to 158 feet, more or less, so that's a 21% variance. This is the way you have to analyze what relief the applicant's asking for, because he's asking to create this lot. So you have to compare what he's asking for against the zoning requirements that exist. So that totals seven variances for lot number 1. Now on the second page, we start with lot number 2, and you can see that he needs a principal front yard setback from the R120 requirement of 80 feet down to 60 feet. That's a 25% variance. He needs a front yard setback for an accessory structure to be reduced from 90 feet to 70 feet. That's a 22% variance. He also needs a lot area variance from the requirement in the R120 zone of 120,000 feet down to 48,284 square feet. That's a 60% variance. And he also needs a lot width variance from the R120 zone to take it down from 200 feet to 158 feet. And that's a 21% variance. In addition, he lacks any street frontage, of which 40 feet is required. He has 0, so he's asking you for 100% variance from that zoning requirement. In addition, something that I don't think council has really adequately addressed in front of the board is that if you want to create a guest house, which has no legal significance in your code unless it's a pre-existing non-conforming building. You don't have any legal guest houses unless they are pre-existing non-conforming. Your zoning code says that an accessory building, which they're saying that this guest house would be, can't be greater than 800 square feet in area. This building is bigger. Can't be greater than 16 feet in height. We are assuming it has to be bigger than that because this is a 1,250 square foot guest house they're talking about. Council can correct me if I'm wrong.
1 story, so we didn't ask for relief.
Okay, so that's one less variance. No cellar and no heat. He needs a variance from that because he's certainly going to heat these buildings. And no part of the building can be dedicated to sleeping quarters, so he needs a variance from that. So he needs 3 separate variances if it's a 1-story building to put in a guest house. So for the second lot, lot number 2, the middle lot, not only does he need all those dimensional variances, he needs the 3 extra variances for the guest houses for a total of 9 variances. The third lot is quite similar. Again, he needs a variance from the R120 principal setback for a principal building to take it down from 80 feet to 60 feet. That's a 25% variance. He needs a variance from the front yard setback for an accessory structure to take it down from 90 to 70 feet. That's a 22% variance. He needs a lot area variance to take it down from 120,000 square feet to 51,000 square feet. That's a 57% variance. And he needs a slight lot width variance to take it down from 200 feet to 188 feet. That's a 6% variance. Again, he's accessing this lot over a right-of-way that is inadequately wide. It's only 20 feet or 22 feet wide. And he's supposed to have 40 feet minimum street frontage, of which he has 0. So he needs 100% variance from that requirement. If the guest house is a 1-story guest house, then he needs 3 additional variances in order to make that building legal. So I have it written down that he needs 9 variances, he would need 8 variances, okay? So under this chart, where we charted 25 variances, if you deduct the 2 variances for the height of the guest houses, he needs 23 variances to make this thing work. And what I would suggest to you is that when you need that many variances to make your plan work, something is wrong. The plan does not fit where it's proposed. And I would challenge the board to identify any case that you've had where someone has come in front of you and asked for 25 variances, and you'd even take it seriously. And it troubles me that so much relief is required here. The general standards for issuance of the variance are that you have an old-fashioned statute that still talks about practical difficulty. The standard has changed a little into a balancing test, but the factors are still relevant. The one that I think is key is that the variances that you grant are supposed to be the minimum variances necessary to resolve the practical difficulty or the unnecessary hardship. And that the variance has to be in the spirit of the general purposes of zoning, and that it has to fit into the character of the neighborhood, and it has to show that it's guided by, it guides development in accordance with your master plan. And I would suggest to you on a plain common sense level that the fact that you need 23 variances shows that it does not fit into the strongest evidence of what your comprehensive plan is for this neighborhood. And what is that? It's the existing zoning. And I know that the board and council have referred to the fact that there are some lots on one side, on the R40 side of the property, that are small lots, little half-acre lots. But the fact of the matter is that those small lots are in a larger zoning district because the Village Board of Trustees over the years has made clear what their policy is. Their policy is not to downzone, it's to upzone. And so I would suggest to you that looking to smaller lots that exist on the other side of that R40 zone as guidance for what you should do is exactly the wrong thing to do, because it contravenes the plans that the village has enacted, and you know that because the small lots are already located in a larger zoning district, which means the village looked at this area and said, we don't want small lots, we want bigger lots. And this application stands zoning planning on its head. The purpose of your zoning is to act in accordance with your comprehensive plan and the long-range objectives of that plan. And along the way, you're supposed to protect the character and promote the public interest. And I would suggest to you that the real question in this case is, it's not the removal of Dispatch Moving Company. That's not the problem in this case. The applicant in this case, who is a colleague of yours, a long-time colleague of yours, is not seeking to remove Dispatch Moving because it's a problem. He's removing it because he knows if he gets rid of that building, it's going to raise the value of this property. This property is much more valuable as residential property than it is as a commercial property, and that's the reason he wants to tear down Dispatch Moving. So the issue in the case is not what he's doing with Dispatch. The real question in this case, and it's a question I think that objective neighbors or people that are watching what you do here on television are going to think is important. And what is important here is, how much are you giving in return to this applicant? And at what cost to the community are you giving it? And I suggest to you, frankly, that people watching this show on television, as I hope they do, are going to meet a decision that this is an ordinary application and not out of line with what you do day in and day out, with a degree of skepticism. And I would suggest to you it may even be worse than skepticism. It's going to be great cynicism, because I don't think if I brought in a client named Jones who owned a property like this, who wanted 23 variances at 3 lots and 2 guest houses, I don't think you'd give me the time of day. You're also supposed to be securing the maximum recharge of groundwater, and council made the argument that, well, this isn't 5 houses. It's not 5 houses because 2 of them are 1,250 square foot guest houses. Well, those are houses. I know people, and you know people, who live in 1,250 square foot guest houses of that size, and they're not guest houses, they're real houses. And the fact of the matter is that I've heard council make this mathematical calculation before, that, well, if you look at the total lot area of 120,000 square feet, he could get 3 40,000 square foot lots in, so we're just divvying it up a different way. Well, that's a false calculation. That's a meaningless calculation. And I say that with respect. Gil is a friend. I say it's a false calculation. Let me state that differently. It's an inaccurate calculation. Because it ignores the existing zoning on the site. It completely ignores the fact that 2/3 of this site is in R120 zoning. So when somebody says to you, well, if you just divide 120,000 by 40,000, which is the lot area for a 1-acre lot, you get 3 lots, and we're just doing the 3 lots in a slightly different configuration. That would be true if this property were entirely within R40 zoning, but it's not. More of the property is within R120 zoning. And that's been a problem of the objectants from the start, that this whole rationale for granting 23 variances completely erases the R120 zoning, as if it doesn't even exist. And worse than that, it creates one lot, the front lot, that's 20,000 square feet that has absolutely nothing to do with the existing zoning on site, which is R120 and R40. And out of the blue, they want you to create a lot that's 20,000 square feet. That is a down zoning. That is not in compliance with your comprehensive plan. And it is overcrowding on this lot, because if you take the gross square footage of 120,000 square feet and you put 5 houses on this lot, I'll grant you, 2 of them are 1,250 square feet, the others are going to be big houses. But if you divvy them up and disperse them on the whole property, that's 1 house per 24,000 square feet. So effectively, you are down zoning this property to about half-acre zoning. That's the net effect here. And that is overcrowding. And that, you know, and it also, and I'm quoting that, you know, that preventing overcrowding, I don't want to get into too much detail here, but that's one of the purposes of zoning. Because in applying the variance standards, you're supposed to not only grant the minimum variance necessary, but you're supposed to do it in compliance with the purposes of zoning, one of which is overcrowding. Another one of which is the convenience of access. Is it convenient access to create 2 right-of-ways that are 20 feet wide and 22 feet wide, and run your cars in and out over that access so that you don't have to have any street frontage? And another thing that I think the board really needs to keep in mind is that there are rules under your village zoning code about creating flag lots. We had some discussion in the earlier case about a flag lot. And your code wisely makes flag lots. If you want to create a flag lot in an R40 zone, you can't have a 40,000 square foot lot. You got to bump the lot size up to about 60,000 square feet. I'm doing this from memory because I can't find it in my notes. And the same thing is true in an R120 zone. You got to bump it up. The reason is they understand that you're going to create a flag. It deducts from the lot area, and they wanted to, when your code drafters drafted that, they wanted to make sure that if you created flag lots, they were well oversized, because they didn't want to create these small lots. Well, this application creates 2 lots that circumvent, and I say deliberately circumvent, the requirements of that code, because they let the cars run in and out over a narrow right-of-way that belongs to another lot. So technically, they can argue, oh, these aren't flag lots we're creating. You know, it's not flag lots because we're running a right-of-way over property that's owned by somebody else, so they're not really flag lots. But the point is, that might be a valid argument if they could do it legally, but they can't. They need your help to do it. They're asking for 2 100% variances to do that. They can't do it. And the fact that they need to ask for those variances, and the fact that your code contains language on flag lots that prohibits that kind of activity, should, I suggest, show you that this is an inadvisable and inappropriate precedent to set on this case, and that it violates your comprehensive planning. And it doesn't protect the character of your neighborhood, and it's going to create a precedent where other people can do it. Why are they doing it? Because they don't have the lot area. The other thing that I take issue with is the statement that there's not a historic resource on site. One of the purposes of zoning is that you're to conserve and protect cultural and historic resources. There is a historic house on this site. It's in great shape. It is listed in the New York State records as a contributing property, and they're going to tear it down. That's a part of this application. Is that protecting the community? Is that honoring the zoning code? I would suggest that it isn't. And another thing I'd like to point out to the board is that you have some other guidance in your code about what to do when a zoning boundary line crosses a property. It's section 116-28. And what it says that it authorizes you to grant variances to lot owners that are in that situation. But you know what? It gives you a good indication of what your village policy is, because it says you're allowed to grant a variance to extend into the more restrictive zone. It doesn't say you can extend into the less restrictive zone or create lots using only the zoning dimensional requirements of the less restrictive zone. That, too, is an indication of what your policy should be in this case. I also would suggest to you that if this is a guest house, as council is suggesting, meaning it's an accessory building that you're going to allow people to live in, that is a use variance. That requires a use variance, because guest houses are not permitted under your code. If it's a second residence, if you just look at it as a second residence, which I don't think the applicant wants to do, because you can probably figure out that that would be subject to, you know, potential abuse, and who knows how heavily it would be used, then it does only involve dimensional difficulties, because if you put your code, like all zoning codes, says that you can only put one dwelling unit on the minimum lot area. Like in the dimensional districts where they give you lot area, it says that's the minimum lot area for one dwelling unit. So if you're putting 2 houses on the lot, you don't have enough lot area. Okay, but I would suggest to you that to create out of the blue a guest house is to create a non-conforming use, and that's a use variance with a much higher degree of difficulty in the evidence that he has to present. And it includes financial verification that he can't get any other reasonable return on the lot. And it's one of the things I noticed about the Moses Lane case, was that there was no financial, you know, no proof. There was just a letter from the owner saying, yeah, I was using that building, you know, as a guest house. And on the Edwards case, which he's citing, there's a big difference between expanding a pre-existing guest cottage and creating one out of whole cloth. And another problem I have here is, how do you, first of all, the statute, you know, I understand that their contention is that you have a history of applying 11628C3, that's where you can grant a certificate of occupancy for a change in a non-conforming use. I understand what he's saying, what council is saying, that you have a history of applying this in a way that you can create new non-conforming uses, but I'm going to say to you that you're an administrative board. You administer the law. You don't change the law, and you can't interpret law that's clearly written. And to my eyes, when I read this, it doesn't permit you to do that. It permits you to grant a certificate of occupancy for a change in a non-conforming use. This case involves the demolition of a non-conforming use, and it's pretty well accepted in the legal world that if you demolish a pre-existing non-conforming use, you lose your rights in it. And for the life of me, even if you were inclined to give them a guest house by some magic that you say is equivalent to tearing down the dispatch moving, how can you give him 2 guest houses when he's tearing down 1 commercial use? So again, I have to come back to the somewhat sore subject of who the applicant is in this case, and I don't think it can go unsaid, because I know your board. You know I've spent a lot of time in front of this board. I had one case that probably went longer than any other case you had. Actually, the 2 of you were on the Abad case. And I know zoning, and I practiced law for 30 years, and you cannot, as an administrative board, interpret the law differently than the way that it is written, and the way it's written suggests that you can change a CO on an existing use, but it doesn't say you can tear it down and give 2 uses for 1 use. And I think the question is, why isn't, the applicant has 2 lots today. He's got 1 commercial use on it. 2/3 of his lot is in R120. He could divide this, the difficulty in this case is the way the lot lines run. That's the difficulty that he is asking you to give him help with. Tearing down dispatch is not the difficulty. That's what's empowering him to make more money on this. The difficulty is the lot lines run perpendicular to the road. You need to change the direction so they're parallel to the road so that he can create square lots that work as residential lots. And our suggestion has always been, create 2, if you created 2 lots here, you're still going to have 2 non-conforming lots, because you're not going to be able to get a lot that complies in any way to the R120 zone. I'm not suggesting that he get any other relief than that. Frankly, that is probably an appropriate resolution of this, because you're required to give him the minimum variance necessary. And I would suggest to you today, the minimum variance necessary is not 23 variances. 23 variances. You show me another case where an applicant wanted 23 variances to create the configuration that he wanted. So I'm urging you to examine this case very carefully in light of what the real policies of the village are, and that's to protect neighborhoods, to lower density. And one of the guiding principles of decision-making in a zoning board of appeals is that you grant the minimum variance necessary. It's kind of a judicial conservatism. It's like telling you, you give the least amount of relief that will alleviate the difficulty, and I would suggest to you the least amount of relief here is 2 oversized lots. It is not a plan that requires 23 variances. I know I've taken a long time and it's late. I would like to submit something in writing. I need to correct this, and I know other council are waiting to talk to. Thank you.
Twice you alluded, I think, to the fact or the notion that he might be treated more favorably because he's one of our colleagues.
I hope that's not true.
It could go the other way. Because you serve the village, sometimes people scrutinize us more. And we're unfairly treated because we serve. So
I have every admiration for anybody that serves the village, and in fact, I know a little bit about it because I'm running for office right now. And it's a hard role. It's a hard role. It's not easy.
What are you running for?
I'm running for town board. And believe me, I've learned it's not easy being in the public eye. So I understand what you just said.
If you win, you're going to maybe get a better taste of that.
Thank you.
Jeff, well, hold on. May I ask anybody else have a question?
No, go ahead.
I haven't poured through the entire record yet, but just help me, Jeff, who do you represent?
I represent Eric Ruttenberg, and I represent Nick Aquavella.
And where do they live?
They are, they're virtually adjacent, but I don't, without looking at the plan, I can't tell you what direction they're in. If you wait a minute, I can tell you where they're.
Look at
They're
the adjacent owners?
They're to the south. To the south, and I believe it may be the south and east. I know Ruttenberg is to the south because I can see his name on the plan. I think Aquavella may wrap around, but they're adjacent neighbors.
They're both to the south.
I believe, yes, they're both. Yeah, I know they're both to the south, but I'm not. I can't without a tax map. I can't tell you the Aquavella lot.
And you also mentioned that there's a historic house on the property. Do you have that documentation?
I can give you what, I don't have it with me tonight, but I can give you what I got from the New York State Department of Parks, Historic Recreation, Historic Preservation, Parks and Recreation. And I can give you a printout of what they have. And my contention has been from the start that you may have comment from your historic consultant, but his comment cannot remove a contributing property that's listed on the State Register of Historic Places and the National Register of Historic Places. And this historic district, I believe, I know is a state register, and I believe it's a National Register one as well. So I'm saying that he can't simply comment and say, oh, that's not contributing anymore, because that inventory was a part of what created the state register. And I have the printout from, it's called the CRIS, and I don't know what that acronym stands for, but it's a page you can hit that will show you the map, and when you hit on it, it gives you the information on the properties. That's where I got the information that it's a contributing property.
I guess my last question would, how much time would you need to produce this information if the board were to close the hearing and keep the record open for written comments?
Well, can I hear what everybody else says, and then we'll
Absolutely.
talk about
I'm
that.
just asking how much time you would need if the board was inclined to do that.
Well, these days, I'd like a little more time than I'd otherwise ask. I don't know. Could you do 3 weeks? That would be...
Okay, just so the board understands where you're coming from.
Has there been new information?
Yeah, on that, I need to correct this.
Well, I think we ought to keep it open.
Whatever. Why don't the board hear everybody else before you decide?
I prefer to keep
what
it
to
open.
do.
I want to hear what council...
I'm just asking how long you would need to create the documentation that you were suggesting you need to do.
The documentation is not that hard for me to do, but I may want to submit something in writing as well. That I'm waiting.
That's understandable.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your time. I know it's very late.
Is there anyone from the public who would like to review this application?
Good evening. Almost morning here again. David Kirst from Matthews, Kirst & Cooley in East Hampton. We represent PHB Realty, which is her name's Petra Bachstein at 48 Captain's Neck Lane. I believe you guys were forwarded an email from her from Tuesday.
We have a letter.
I also have a follow-up from her that I'd like to read. It's brief, and I will try and be brief and not repeat anything that Mr. Bragman stated. This is from Mrs. Bachstein. I'm writing follow-up to my prior letter to Kimberly Allen that was forwarded to the Zoning Board's attention. I read the minutes from the June 22nd meeting regarding the application of 550 and 558 Hill Street, LLC. I'd like to point out how unfair it is to shift the burden onto the neighboring property owners to thoroughly review the application and tell the board what variances are required. My counsel has reviewed the application. They counted 25 required variances where the applicant only listed 13. In addition, I hope the board will see past the applicant's claimed benefits to the neighborhood, which every neighbor has agreed is exaggerated, to see that the applicant does not face any practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship in complying with the village code. The only difficulty being alleviated is maximizing the applicant's property value, which should not justify the effective rezoning of the applicant's property. I have a copy of that letter. Pass through. I'd like to start by briefly addressing the two applications that council says are precedent in this matter. For 220 Bishop's Lane is really apples and oranges to this site. That was a full-blown industrial use that anyone in this village was property line to property line, dirt, dust, noise. To compare it to this use is really, it's apples and oranges. It's more like apples and ducks because they have nothing in common. The only thing they have in common is that they were pre-existing non-conforming uses. And here, the only person bothered by this existing use is the applicant, and that this use, the claim that they can take this use and make it into something much greater is really a misstatement. The building is maxed out on coverage. They can't increase the building coverage on this lot. They can't change it to another non-conforming use without approval from this board. And if that was something that they could have done and maximize this, they would have done that economically already, but it's not. The value here is, as Mr. Bragman said, is in removing the commercial use. So that's the benefit here to the applicant. It's a favor to the applicant to let them get rid of this building. It's not a benefit to the neighborhood. When it comes to 45 Moses Lane, I understand the precedent set by that application, and I think it clearly doesn't benefit the applicant in this matter. That was a single lot that had an pre-existing non-conforming use on it. That building was converted and was allowed to be changed into a guest house pursuant to the village code, the section that was just cited, 11628, which is your purview to allow a change in a certificate of occupancy. That's what was done on that property. And that property was nearly twice the required minimum lot size. None of these proposed lots are even half of the required lot size. So they had a 36,000 square foot lot in a 20,000 square foot zone, which was a consideration of this board. It's noted in their decision, in your decision, that there's significant lot area here based on the zoning district to allow this guest house to be built instead of the pre-existing storage garage or bottling plant, whatever it was called. That's just simply not the case here. As what's going on here, if the applicant wanted to simply convert that building into another non-conforming use of a guest house, have at it. You've got 2 lots with 2 houses, 1 house on each lot and 1 guest house. But that's not what he's here for. They're here for 3 houses, 2 guest houses on 3 lots, which is completely not the precedent that was set by the 45 Moses Lane decision. And to compare the two, I think it really doesn't serve this board or that prior decision justice. Mr. Bragman already spoke about the street frontage. Again, this is a intentional end around on the flag lot regulations that require, in the 120 zone, would require a 150,000 square foot lot. That's 30,000 square feet bigger than this overall lot. And they're trying to create 2 lots, less than half of the 120, less than 60,000 square foot, where they would be required for 150,000 square foot. In addition, it also allows them to avoid the necessary 25-foot width of that right-of-way, which gives, incrementally more lot area to that front lot, which is necessary when you're proposing a 20,000 square foot lot in a 120,000 square foot zone. And just my final point is the idea that these guest houses are somehow a less intense use. There's no restriction that they couldn't have a servant there full-time with their own family. How is that not an extra unit of density? How is that not a full-blown septic, traffic? How is it not? There's no restriction that says you can only use this on weekends for your friends. or your family can only stay out here every other week, they could have somebody living there full-time. There's no restriction on that. And I think that's something that really needs to be looked at as well. So again, I agree with practically everything Mr. Bragman said, and I'd just like to reiterate my support for that and what I've said here tonight, and hopefully the board will take that into consideration. And I'm done. I don't need to take up any more of our time.
I'd like to take issue with your notion that the moving company was not intrusive to this village. If you traveled Hill Street and had to wait for somebody to back up into that driveway, especially if it happened today, the disruption is enormous, wasn't it?
Respectfully, I grew up on West Prospect Street. I grew up on Guilfoyle Street, the west end of West Prospect Street. My family still lives there. So I'm intimately familiar with the travelings on Hill Street. I live now in Hampton Bays. I go to Southampton, my office in East Hampton. My wife works in Southampton Village. To think that the bumper-to-bumper line on Hill Street in the morning is somehow now affected by the occasional truck coming in and out of there, I don't think anybody's claimed that there's any great benefit for that. And
well, I do, for one.
You know, and my client lives right next door, and she is of the same opinion, and so is any of the other neighbors she's spoken with.
Your client go out?
Yes, I believe she does.
Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard?
Good evening, Madeline Van John, representing the Southampton Association. I'll be really brief because it's late. I don't want to repeat anything. Basically, we have a lot of the same concerns as Mr. Kirst and Mr. Bragman mentioned. I'd just like to submit this letter for the record. And the major issue is that even if they are removing a nonconformity, there's some dispute as to how much disturbance that's actually causing, but they're proposing to increase the number of nonconformities so greatly that it just seems the plan should be reduced in scope in order to maybe, you know, they could get something, they could get one guest house, but to be getting this many additional units of density just for removing one commercial nonconformity seems a little excessive. And we're also just worried about the precedent that this would set for other people who have parcels of land that they might want to subdivide in this zoning district. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to be heard?
Mr. Chairman, I just would ask that if you would consider closing the hearing, but keeping the matter open for written comments. We could agree on a time schedule. I would prefer to do that. It may not be for the next meeting, but I'd like to bring some kind of conclusion to this, and I think we can do it in writing. If Mr. Bragman needs 3 weeks, and the other people need 3 weeks,
Where's
that
Mr.
would be okay.
Bragman? That satisfy you if we
We would obviously like the opportunity to
could put
respond.
it off for 2 months?
Right, close it for written comments only.
Close the written comments and adjourn it to September.
That would work.
That should work. And can we all submit at the same date? We don't need to go back and forth. I'm sorry.
Just for your information, what the planning board did, as you may remember, the planning board did a similar thing. They gave objectants 2 weeks, and then they gave us 2 weeks.
Do you have any problem? You've heard everything we have. I've heard everything you have.
You're going to go back and forth with each other, or are you going to send it to us?
My preference would be that we just both submit on the same date. He's heard our arguments, we've heard his. Let's just give you everything at once. No back and forth.
Okay.
I think that's better.
Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay, that's what we're doing.
So
All right, so if we don't hear it again until September, if you could have it in by,
Just give us a
we
date.
don't need, the next work session would only be like
Why don't
2
you give
weeks and
them,
5 days.
4 weeks to your next meeting for submissions, and then we'll have it
Yeah, how's
available
that?
for
4 weeks.
4 weeks from today.
Okay.
4 weeks from
Okay.
today, and then we'll hear it again in September.
Okay.
But written, that's no more
Written,
testimony.
right.
Just written.
I'm okay.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to close this for written decisions, written evidence to be submitted in 4 weeks from today
by all parties.
by all parties.
So if there's any member of the public who also wants to submit
Right.
something, they may as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thanks very much.
He moved it. You want to second it?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
That finally brings us up to the new cases.
Did you do the adjournments already?
We closed it.
You know what, we didn't do the adjournments. We never adjourned the adjournment.
Oh, I'm sorry, good, thank you.
You can do that.
Before we do that, we have a little stuff to clean up. We had a whole bunch of cases that were adjourned, and we didn't move them to adjourn them officially. Case number 2908 and 2909, the latch at 101 Hill Street and 109 Hill Street. 2944, the Village of Southampton, Gin Lane. 2959, 71 Teacups at 71 South Main Street. 2961, Thomas Fitzgerald III, 352 Captain's Neck Lane. And 2972, Morgan and Robin Grace, 292 Ox Pasture Road. I move that we adjourn those as requested.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now we have 2974 Hudson Point Associate LLC, 50 David White's Lane.
For the applicant, Gilbert G. Flanagan, for the final time this evening, I've submitted an affidavit of posting and mailing for the record. This is an application which is similar to ones you've seen in the past involving the Polo Club condominiums. Specifically, it's a request really for relief from a previous decision of this board. It's not a request for any zoning setback relief or any other type of relief, but rather to permit my client the ability to construct a 64-square-foot hot tub within the transitional yard established to the west of his property, which buffers the Polo Club condominium from the car dealership located to the west. As I say, there are no dimensional or setback variances required. You may remember that a couple of years ago, this board, some of you anyway, granted relief from the same provision to enable my client to install a patio to the west of that, of his unit, which is Unit A2 in the Polo Club condominium. I've submitted with the application some previous cases that involved similar relief, including the case which established the basis for the transitional yard. One of the things I'll mention is you might say, well, why would you have a residential person having to worry about a transitional yard which buffers the residential person from the commercial person? And I think the answer is really in the nature of notice. In one of your decisions, I think it was the 2011 decision, which granted the condo the ability to have its pool patio encroach, that anyone who encroached in that transitional yard from the condo would have to be aware that he might be getting closer to the car dealership, and it was really more of, I think, in the nature of a notice provision. So my client, obviously, if he's granted this permission, does it with full knowledge of the fact that there's a car dealership to the west of him, as there was when he got permission to install his patio, which was approved by this board. I really don't have to say too much about this. As I say, I also included with my application a letter that I did back in December of whenever it was when I submitted the patio application, and that laid out the structure by which the condominium allows such encroachments. There are areas immediately around the various units which are designated for the exclusive use of the unit owner. And a unit owner can make an application to construct certain things within that area if he gets approval from the condominium board, which my client did in this case. And there's a letter that accompanied the application that indicates that the condo has approved it. It's also important to note that this particular unit is the only unit which would be affected by encroaching into that transitional yard which faces the car dealership, so the danger of a precedent is limited, plus the fact that the reason for the transitional yard really works the opposite way. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. I will give you a, I don't have to do that now, that's all right.
I have
No
a
more
question.
paper tonight.
If the board has any questions. I have a question for Gil. Sure. Gil, Unit A2, is that one unit?
It's one
The
unit.
entire building is one unit?
I believe it is,
And that's your
yes.
client's?
That's my client.
And the area where you're putting the proposed spa, is that lawn now?
I'm sorry, I believe it probably is.
And
I can tell you, I have an aerial photograph that
Well, it was
shows.
patio.
it's right, it looks right adjacent to the patio.
Yeah, it is, it's connect immediately here. In fact, I might as well submit the aerial photograph, this shows it. I'll give you a copy.
And the area, just so you can describe it to the board, the area between this spa is already landscaped, and there's nothing proposed to change with that landscape?
Oh, you mean if you're referring to the landscape to the west? No,
Right,
in
it
fact,
appears there's some trees and so on
No,
there. So
no, as you can see where the patio is, the spa would be centered on the north edge of the patio, so that there would be no impact on the trees. No, it's all just the lawn.
Okay. They're the only questions I have.
This is the unit with the patio that's right near the swimming pool?
Yes.
There seems to be two units there with patios.
No, that's the only patio on the west, one with
There
on
would
the
be
patio, on the west side.
Okay.
Yeah, but part of this, you see there, the other patio I mentioned that encroached. Sure. Yeah, the other patio that I mentioned, you notice there's a patio around the swimming pool?
Yeah.
Part of that encroaches, and that was the subject of a previous variance that this board granted.
Now, that pool does not belong just to
No.
this one owner,
That's the community.
community.
That's the community pool, correct.
so he's going to put the spa where there's now grass
Yes.
to the west of the patio,
No, to the north, actually.
to the north of the patio.
Northwest, if you will. So it's right, it's pretty much centered on the north line of the patio.
North?
Here's the north arrow. It's northwest, really. Here
Okay,
it is there, huh?
over here. This is the patio then.
Yes.
Yeah, the patio is there pursuant to your previous
Right.
variance.
The patio faces where the cars are.
Correct. Right, the car dealership is right over here, right here.
Right. Have any other questions?
No.
Have anything else, Wayne?
No.
Not in the chick. Is he asleep over there?
He's waiting for a wetland case to pop up.
Is there anyone from the public like to hear of this application? Yes.
I guess I was going to be here at 11:30, but I think I've beaten my guess. Hello, my name is Susan Sherry Clark, and our property is a property directly to the east of the Bowling Club condominiums. And I have an issue with it being a hardship, but before I go into that, because there are other solutions to putting in a hot tub for that unit, my first concern is basically with the notification. And the one thing, I went to the building department yesterday and I got a list of the people who received the notices, and there were 23, including myself, or excuse me, 22. And back in 2011, when it was before the planning board, 66 letters were sent out. And when it was at the ZBA in 2011, there were 50 letters sent out. There are a number of people who did not receive a letter, And specifically, the condo owner directly to the east is not on the list. The other 4 condo owners are not on the list. They never received a letter. There's some reference in the file saying that the management company had polled the board of directors, but that's not necessarily even the property owners. Plus, there are now property owners across the street at Canterbury Mews or within 200 feet, and also at the Colony. So I'm not sure how many are missing, but there are a number of people who did not receive letters. In addition, no sign was put outside. In fact, I went and looked this afternoon, and that's on the second page. I took photographs. There's no sign erected or posted as required by the code on Hampton Road or on David White's Lane. And it's very specific, saying that a sign is 11625B2, a sign stating the date, time, and place of the public hearing is required to be erected at the street line not less than 10 days prior to the meeting, and that would be approximately July 17th. And it wasn't even there as of today. So, I mean, for those 2 things, and just as of note, it's not Hudson Point Association, LLC, it's Hudson Point Associates. So in the legal ad, the name wasn't correct and the unit wasn't identified. I have more, but that's just the basics, and it's late, so I don't need to go through any more. But I respectfully ask that the proper notification be sent out for and have the public hearing rescheduled because it hasn't been notified correctly.
Bill, do you have a list of who was notified?
I think I probably do, which I got from the village, and that's attached to the affidavit. It's attached to the affidavit of mailing.
Ma'am, can I ask you where do you live?
I live at 393 Hampton Road. Is the property directly to the east?
When you say property, this is a condominium, so you're in unit.
No, right.
You're not in the condominium?
The Polo Club. It's a debate right now, I guess, if that's 3 properties or 1 property. It shows up, right now it's showing up as 1 property on the tax maps. But.
So each condominium is a property.
Pardon?
Each condominium unit is a property.
Right, so we live directly, it's on the...
You're not in the condominium?
Not in the condominium. I live in the farmhouse at 393 Hampton Road.
And do you have,
my family since 1940.
What is your specific concerns about the application?
Well, my first concern that it wasn't properly noticed. So without going any further, I could come back and, since it's getting late, and tell you my other concerns and go through. I think this is at least the 6th time this is a variance has been requested for this property, or a different type of things have been made, exceptions have been made for it. So I prefer to come back and do that after it's properly noticed.
But you're here tonight.
I'm here tonight, but a number of us.
So you have no concerns to express?
Yes, I do have concerns, but I said if it's not properly noticed for a public hearing, I might as well come back and I'll go through my concerns at that time.
But the purpose of the notice is for you to attend the hearing, and you're here, and I guess the question is, you're to the east and this is on the west side. What is your concern with the hot tub that's proposed?
So this is a public hearing, even though hasn't been properly
It is a public hearing at this point. The board has opened the public hearing, and
but it hasn't been properly noticed.
that's your contention. That's a question the board will decide.
I gave you photographs saying there's no sign put out there. Is there a sign?
I'll let Mr.
posted?
Flanagan respond to that.
Is there an affidavit in the? I didn't see an affidavit put in the file that wasn't.
Is this an old list?
That's the list that we got from the village.
These are but these people all get notified.
What's that? They got notified.
But people did not get notified, even in the condo associations. I have their names.
I was asked a question. I'd like to respond to it. The property was posted. As you know, a condominium, the fee ownership of a condominium is basically where the building is. So the street line of the condominium is actually, it was posted, it was in the front of the building. You'd have to drive into the property to look at it. And here's a picture my secretary took with her cell phone.
Otherwise, they don't have to post it
No, in fact, on,
It's posted
just a
after-
minute, just a minute,
Well, that is the street.
just a minute,
Street line, that's a private
Just-
road.
just a minute.
It's still a street line.
It's still a street, it's still a street line, and to post it on Hampton Road would have been inappropriate because that's the common area that's owned by the condominium. It's not owned by this unit. So this is the only legal place that it should be posted.
No. That condo is directly on Hampton Road.
That is not owned by this unit. Each condominium, as you probably know, has its own it's its own little lot that's circumscribed by the building. The property that's around it is the common area that's owned by the condominium association. It's a separate legal entity.
All right,
So this
it has
is,
been posted.
it has been, this is the only one I have, but I'll submit it for the record.
And the condominium guild,
The people across the street should have gotten a notice on the other side of Hampton Road, and there's no way they would have known if you hadn't posted it. I've been to the planning board, I've been to the ZBA. In fact, the last time when you were here with the same unit, it was posted on Hampton Road, and it was posted on David White's Lane.
Then we
Besides.
we probably overposted it then.
I have a list of people who evidently were notified.
But that doesn't include the condo
People
owners.
all the way down the end of, a whole block down on White Street. Kid Construction, Mulberry Tree Irrevocable Trust,
Right. There's
Felicia Ann
Dreamcatcher LLC.
Joshua Clark, 16 LLC, Grattan, Marvin Dozier, Kid Construction, on and on.
But I'm saying there are other ones, and I have their names
The
there.
ones that live in the complex,
It's the
sign was
Dreamcatcher
posted right in front of
LLC, there's SPDWL LLC, Stanley Parker, there's Richard Cabot, Alexander C. Silverman. But I know in the condo, the Drexlers didn't receive one, they're not on the
Spoke to
list.
these people about this?
Pardon?
Did you speak to these people about it?
No, I didn't. I didn't realize it until
How do
yesterday,
you know they haven't gotten it, or
because they're not on the list.
not on the list?
Mr. Chairman, if
But I
I
didn't
might,
get the list until yesterday, when I was at the building department. It was about
I might also...
3:30.
You have this aerial photograph which I submitted. I'd like you to take a look at it. If this, okay. The pen indicates where the hot tub is to be located. There are two buildings, two condominium buildings between the hot tub and the east property line. The objectant's property is shown here. It defies description that this hot tub would have any impact whatsoever on this objectant.
It
And
goes back,
this is a similar objection which she raised at the hearing on the patio, and I think we addressed it satisfactorily at that time.
but if it hasn't been properly noticed, I don't know how you can have a hearing. It's just basics.
We've mailed it, you're here, as Mr. Bruin has said, I believe by your appearance, you've waived your objection.
But there are other people who may have been here, they may have been concerned, the woman with the condo that's next door
Well, they're
may
not
not even
here.
know about it.
They didn't come.
They didn't come. So I would respectfully request that the application be closed.
Is there anybody else?
Oh, I have
like to be
other
heard?
things on it. I just was going to wait, if this is going to stay open, I can go through my list of concerns, but if you're going to notice it,
absolutely.
Go ahead.
okay. It goes back to, and you talk about different, variances and pre-existing, it goes back to the 1950s, there was residential property until the then owner asked to put a gas station in and came to my grandmother, she signed, she was a nice lady, she didn't have any idea, I think, what the ramifications, along with any of the other neighbors. And eventually that expanded to a service garage and a car dealership.
What year was that?
This is the 1950s. Going into the 70s, I would like to do this at the next...
Well, what does that have to do with the
Well, what I'm
application
saying
of
is
hot tubs? What happened 60 years ago?
each time this has happened, there's another variance granted. And then the car dealership wants to expand 50 feet. So they say, oh, well, we'll promise we'll put this into the transitional zone. That affected our property because that moved the car dealership over even further. Then when we went to build these condominiums...
How does that move the car dealership closer? The transitional yard.
Because for them to get their variance, they agreed to put the transitional yard in the residential section of the property that wasn't pre-existing.
And what was the purpose of the buffer?
That's what, pardon?
What was the purpose of that buffer?
The purpose of the buffer was to have it between the highway, the pre-existing highway business, because they were like 4 point some, close to 5 acres. And the commercial part was a smaller section of a larger property, and they wanted to expand. So they said, well, we'll expand over, and we're going to put parking there, but we agreed to put that transitional zone in the residential section. That was before the property was subdivided.
We understand that, but again, what is the purpose of the buffer?
Oh, right, with the purpose of
Who is it designed to protect?
Well, exactly, it's designed to protect, but that bumped that
Protect whom?
commercial property farther out.
Whom is it designed to protect?
Pardon?
Who is it designed to protect?
It was residents.
Which residents?
Not the car
So
dealer.
exactly, but if that bumped the commercial property even closer to us,
Why, by having the buffer?
what?
By having the buffer?
No, by moving the commercial closer to our property.
The commercial didn't
Moving the
move.
noise.
Commercial
back.
didn't move.
Pardon?
When did the commercial
They
move?
enlarged it. They built an addition. It was before it was the car dealership. Now there were 2 buildings
It's been
there.
a car dealership for as long as I can
That was
remember.
back in
It was a Dodge dealership for
94 is when
years.
they came here for a 1,080 square foot addition. Then in 2011, they never put patios originally, even with the condos. They put just vegetation behind it. So they had a site plan with no patios. Then they decided they needed 6. Then we had the one fellow that's in Hudson Point Associates wanted to add an additional patio, and I came and I objected to that. So that got put in the transition zone. Now they want to put one more thing. So every time they come back, it sort of snowballs. It's one more thing. So this is close to the 6th time for this one piece of property requesting another variance,
Well, it's
another
more than
exception.
one piece of
Buildings
property.
Between you and
Pardon?
there are 2 buildings between you and the hot tub. The hot tub is facing a
Well,
car dealership.
but it's just not one hot tub. Then it's not a community hot tub. That particular condo is just steps from the swimming pool, and he's going to have his own hot tub. Then you have 5 other people in that
They'll have to
complex.
come back to us for it.
So,
But-
ma'am,
so
may
when
I?
it comes to either being, practical difficulties or
It's a
hardships.
balancing test. Practical
It is
difficulty
balancing.
is not one of the
But
things.
he's already gotten the patio. He could put the hot tub on the patio he already has.
Put it right
Or he
next
could
to it.
put the hot tub on the patio that's near Hampton
No, the
Road.
whole thing is it doesn't affect you at all. It doesn't affect your property whatsoever.
Well, it will if there are more. Once you grant one, and we see it happen over and over, once you grant one, then there's another, and then there's another.
Now, I remember you when the condos went in. You were very
Oh.
much against the condos. Now, didn't they provide a nice buffer between you and the car dealership?
I'm not happy with it. I mean, it is what it is.
I know,
It
I
is what
remember
it
you
is.
talking, that you like to look at the birds and the this and the that, but you didn't own those birds. You didn't own that.
It is what it is. But then now there's one more thing. And if they place the hot tub on the patio on Hampton Road, they wouldn't even have to come to the ZBA. They wouldn't need a variance for
They're
that.
not putting it
That's
there.
not true. Actually, we had one shown there originally, and you made us remove it, because that would be in the front yard, so we couldn't do that.
Oh, there was already was one on that
And it was
patio. You
removed.
weren't allowed to have it then?
We were
I know it got
It was
removed, but I
removed.
don't know why.
Of course, it was in the front yard.
Ma'am, is it fair to say that that buffer was there to protect
It's
this
actually the backyard. for
condominium
that one.
owner?
Pardon?
Is it fair to say that buffer was there to protect this condominium, this particular condominium from the car dealership?
No, it was there way before the condominiums were built, so it wasn't put there to protect that condominium. It pre-exists the condominiums.
So
It has to do with the
Buffer
expansion of
pre-existed
the car
the condominium?
dealership.
What's that?
the requirement was
pre-exist the
there
condominium?
for
Yes,
the
it
buffer,
did. Yes,
but then the condominiums were built,
Residentially zoned.
and they're the direct
East.
beneficiary of that buffer. Is that correct?
They are now, but that wasn't the intent. The condos came afterwards.
Well, I believe the intent by this board, and by the way, we're here not to vary a condition of the statute. We're here to modify a condition of the prior grant by this board. So the question is whether the board will consider that modification to the condition that they granted. And the issue here is the buffer, I believe, was put there to provide a buffer between the commercial property and the future residential development of this site. Now that the site got residentially developed, the direct beneficiary of the buffer is this particular unit. And so if anybody's harmed by the reduction of the buffer, it is this unit holder. And this board previously, in granting the modification to allow the patio, made clear that this owner cannot come in and complain about a reduction in the buffer and any activity on the commercial property.
But if the condos had been built smaller, you would have had plenty of room for his
That's not an issue before
You
this
can
board.
move the patio,
It's not an issue.
That's irrelevant.
You got to
you
stick
can
to
move
the
the
issue.
hot tub
That's
to
not
the
an issue.
patio.
It's not
Doesn't
an
need
issue.
to be more.
So the issue for the
everything's-
board, which would be very helpful, is if you can tell them how you, as the owner of the property to the east, 2 or 3 units removed, are harmed by the introduction of the hot tub on this location.
The reason that we're harmed is because it's going to be for the future and more so than the present. So if.
So you're suggesting that by the action of this board, it will set a precedent that they have to follow automatically on all other cases?
They don't have to, but it happens often. One person does something and another 2 or 3 want it, so yeah.
So you recognize that the law says that this board is not bound by their precedent. They need to consider it, but they're not bound by that.
Well, I don't know, when I'm here, it seems like once the precedent's set, it doesn't seem to change.
Do you have anything else to add as far as what harm to you specifically will occur?
I guess it's just because of the hardship and the practical difficulty. I don't see taking a few steps to a swimming pool, you know, being any type of difficulty.
The water's cold.
Not hot enough.
Well, if it was a community pool, I mean, that even might be better, then at least everybody would be
It is a
sharing.
community pool.
No, excuse me, a community hot tub.
Well, how many people can you put in a hot tub? It's
Well,
like-
they do have those, but now we wouldn't have to look forward to having 5 more. But I still don't understand, if it hasn't been properly noticed, how,
The sign was right in front of the unit. Right in front of the unit. He showed us a picture of it.
It's the only place it legally had to be posted. Just let me say one more thing. As I pointed out with the patio application, this is the only, you're talking about precedent, this is the only unit that would be affected by this. There are no other units that have this situation. The decision you rendered in 2011 specifically says what Mr. Bruin indicated. In fact, if anybody intrudes into that unit from the residential area, he does that with knowledge that the car dealership is there. That's what really the whole thing is about.
so this is going back to the planning board since it's a change in site plan?
No, it's not going back to the planning board. Why would it go back to the planning board?
Pardon?
Why would it go back to the planning board?
Because it wasn't in the original site plan and that the board
That's why they're
actually.
here for a variance.
Modification of the condition.
Pardon?
A modification of the conditions.
If it's a modified site plan, according to
They
what
don't
I
have
read, it
do a
needed
new
to go
site
back to the
plan.
planning
They don't
board.
have to do a new site plan.
Modified site plan,
They
modification.
don't have to do a new site plan. They're either going to get the variance for the hot tub or they're not. That's what it comes down to.
I just have the specific site plan that was approved by the planning board and didn't include that.
That was for the units. Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard of this application? You want to close it?
I believe, number one, as far as the jurisdiction, the statute says that it has to be posted on the street abutting the property. In this instance, the condominium is the property. As Mr. Flanagan has indicated, the common area, I think maybe the village should look at that if they want to provide some different notice, but technically he has complied with that. And I believe if Mr. Flanagan has submitted an affidavit indicating he's done the mailing as required by the village office, I believe you have jurisdiction on this matter. And if there's, I don't think there's any other information or facts that would change the need to keep this record open.
Okay. But I will be forwarded on because I brought up the point about the condo owners not getting the notifications in 2011. So it should have been well corrected by now.
So we have a motion to close this for decision.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Could be quick, John.
Good try.
7.5, here's 7.5. One we had years ago. On the application of case number 2975, holdings by Willow Lane Holdings, LLC, 90 Wyandanch Lane.
For the applicant, John Bennett, this is a request for a modification of a prior grant from this board. In 2011, first of all, the property currently benefits from a certificate of occupancy that, for the purposes of this application, the things to concentrate on is there are 3 single-family residences on the property. They are shown on the survey that's part of the application. These 3 extant houses, 1, 2, 3. In 2011, and if you look at the application, we submitted a smaller survey, which is part of the original application. In 2011, when we came in, the property had those 3 homes, which it still has now, which are certificated. It also had a permit to rebuild an apartment with a garage, and a permit to continue construction of a foundation. Continue the construction and rebuilding of another detached dwelling quarters down right by the water. So what we did back in 2011 is we came in and we said, we can't take these 2 down because they're contributing, they're historic, the northerly and the southerly house. But we could take down this house, we would give up this permit, and we'll give up this permit. Let us build a conforming house here. So what we did was we came in, we had a situation where there were 3 single-family residents, 2 accessory structures, and we said, give us a large house, and we'll take these 2 homes here and convert them to guest houses, and we'll do away with this house, give up this permit, and give up this permit. As of today, the only part of the variance that has been executed, so to speak, is we did fully remove this cottage, and pursuant to a wetlands approval, which the village has acknowledged has been completed, we took out this foundation and we revegetated in this area. The property changed hands once from the Millay Testamentary Trust. It was then owned by Glenn August, and then now it has come into the ownership of my client. When my client purchased the property, prior to purchasing it, she said, is there any way we can go back to the board and try to keep this house, but also, you know, as with these other 2, convert them to a guest house and still give up these 2. And I said, well, you know, you gave up one of the pre-existing units. You gave up 2 of them. In order to, in effect, go back and try to save this one, you're going to have to throw some stuff into the pot. You're going to have to say, well, we can give you some other things if you would consider letting us keep this middle house, which we had agreed to take down as a 3rd guest house. Remember, we had 5 units. We went to 5 units. We went to 3. Now we're asking to go to 4 because we want to build a main house here.
Where is the 3rd guest house? Is that barn?
Right here. No, the barn's coming down. That's coming down. That's just
Where's
an
the
old
3rd
barn.
guest house then?
The 3rd guest house would be the center one. It's currently has a CO.
C2, unless you're counting what's the main house now. Is that going to stay?
Don't look at, no, this main house isn't here. There are currently 3 single-family residences
Right.
here. We said we'd give this, amongst other things, we said we'd give this one up.
Okay,
We'd like to keep that.
all right.
Okay. Still give up this and give up this. So I said, what can we offer to allow us to keep this as a guest house when we had already said that we'll give it up? So we talked about it. So this is what we've come up with, and hopefully you think is a fair enough mitigation and conditions to allow us to keep this. Again, all as guest houses. They would, be...
So what was the main house is going to stay as a guest house? The house that has the pool behind it?
Yeah, that would become a guest house.
Okay, all right.
This, if you were kind enough to let us keep
Right.
it, would become a guest house.
And the
And this
other
would
one
become a
would be a
guest
guest
house. And of course, this is
House
gone,
itself
and this is gone.
It's going to be way down on the property, further down on the
The
property.
proposed house is here. Now, we
They
could...
have it all staked out now.
Yes. The proposed house is here. We could have a maximum size house here, but we're proposing the following. If you're kind enough to allow us to keep this structure and convert it from a single-family residence to a guest house, what we would do is we would build this house. It's around 8,700 square feet, but have a covenant on this house that said so long as we had this third guest house, this house would never be bigger. This house would stay at 8,700 square feet. It would never go to the maximum. So that, again, I'm trying to, in exchange for getting back this guest house, I'm trying to limit the density on the property. What else would we do? There's a tennis...
We just
Sure.
stop
Yep.
moving on that.
Yep.
Just remind the board, in their prior decision, what the board allowed there as far as coverage, size, or otherwise, and what would be the maximum size house?
The board, we had a 10,000 square foot house on the property, but it was merely a placeholder. The decision didn't prohibit a larger single-family residence. That was
What would be the maximum on that?
18,000 square feet. It's a big lot. And even if you took the square footage out of the accessory structures, which I believe a recent amendment to the code does, you would still have more than enough room staying behind the 150 feet of the wetlands to build an 18,000 square foot house. So we'd be taking away the potential for about 10,000 square foot on the property, so long as you were kind enough to let us keep this middle house as a guest house. So there was no limitation in the original decision on the size of what I'm going to call, well, what would be the main house. But we're proposing a limitation of 8,700 square feet. There's also an existing tennis court there, which was very much out of conformity. The prior owner wanted to take it down, take it out. I said, no, don't do that. You've got a tennis court, which you never get back. You'd never get a variance for. It's
It's in the front yard.
and it's sitting right in the front yard. We're proposing to sink that. It's a pre-existing non-conforming court. We thought it would be a good idea to sink that. We've kept the house outside of the wetlands jurisdiction, and we don't show it on the map because we just sort of came up with this today, but my client wanted to offer as a condition a 25-foot native buffer down, so we would bring 25 feet in from the wetlands and a buffer, a planted vegetated buffer, and we'll show you that next month.
John, what exists there now?
Nothing. There's no buffer.
Lawn all the way down?
Lawn all the way down, all the way down. Again, I'm trying to put enough stuff in the pot that you let us keep this third building as a guest house. And finally, we would put, people poo-poo it and they say, oh, it's no big deal. The town is going to require it. Well, the village doesn't have any proposed law to require it. The county doesn't have any proposed law. It doesn't have any law to require it as we speak. For the main house, we would put one of those innovative alternative wastewater systems. And again, even though we specifically kept the house outside of the 150-foot regulated area. So then there are two other requests, one of which is to add, they're very small requests to add, forgive me, to the southerly structure, is a historic structure, a 46-square-foot addition, which is a main floor powder room, very small. And then on the northerly of the three structures, a 28-square-foot addition, which is essentially a dormer. Very, very de minimis. But the primary aspect of the application is to see if we can save this middle structure, which we had previously offered to give up as a guest house. Again, currently 3 single-family residences, certificated as such, want to go to an 8,700 square foot house, covenanted against anything larger, as long as we can, with your permission, maintain this middle structure as a guest house. 2 small additions to the existing single-family residence on the north and the south, but then again, these would be converted to guest house. So what would you end up with? You'd end up with a single-family residence of around 8,700 square feet, 3 guest houses. We'd sink the tennis court, do a 25-foot buffer down here, despite the fact that we're out of the wetlands jurisdiction. We continue to give up the cottage that was down here and an innovative system here. We did meet, and and Eric Bregman is here, we did meet with the neighbor to the north, Mr. Sammy, who was concerned about the preservation of certain trees in this area. We went and we marked the trees. We're working on a methodology for doing a couple of things. One is to preserve the trees. My client is very concerned about preserving the trees. Some of the trees, a couple of trees we're going to take out, but one we'll replace. I think we had a good meeting at site with Eric and his client today. He was also concerned about excessive vibration. I guess the last time they resurfaced this tennis court, they used a large vibrating steamroller. We agreed not to do that, and also to give the Sammys some comfort on the construction of this house, which will be a traditional foundation. There'll be no piling system or anything. We're out of any sort of, we're in a zone X, so we don't need any type of FEMA construction requirements. And we'll talk about maintaining the screening on the property. I think Eric has a letter that he will present, and I appreciate him working cooperatively with us. I did also speak later this afternoon with Gil Flanagan, who represents Lowley Weymouth, who is the owner to the south, and Mr. Flanagan, authorized me to convey to the board that Ms. Weymouth has no objection. So I'm coming back. I'm asking to take back one of the things that I said I would give up, but I think I'm throwing enough in the pot, so hopefully you'll agree that I'm actually...
Take down that barn.
Excuse me?
You're going to take down the barn.
Yeah, the barn's going to come down, yeah. I mean, the barn's actually in the process of coming down.
Yeah, you can see it is.
Yeah, yeah. But there was another barn that had it was a garage and apartment with a permit to rebuild. We gave that up at the last time, so we're
down by the water.
Yes, and the one down by the water as well, and we revegetated that. I don't know, Wayne, if I was able, I sent you, I think, a copy of
the wetlands special permit.
The wetlands special permit and a letter from the village saying that all those conditions had been taken care of.
John, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
You mentioned innovative septic system.
Yes.
Is that just for the house, or is
just
it
for the main
each
house.
of the guest houses? Just
for the main house. These are rather small, so I'd rather.
What kind of systems are there for those? Would the health department require them to be upgraded?
No, because we're not, on a subdivision they would. Yeah, on a subdivision they would, yes. Yeah, on a subdivision they would.
Would your client consider that if the board needed that as additional mitigation?
I guess, sure. They get expensive, and there are 3 of them, and these are small homes. So, but I can ask, sure. Sure, I can ask. I can ask those. The problem with them is that on a small home, they need some effluent to keep going, because there's a bit of treatment that goes on them. There's a
In other words, if the houses are not being used, they don't
yeah,
operate
they just
efficiently?
then all of a sudden number one, you need a bit of effluent to keep them going. You know, these are one of those things that we quickly as lawyers become sort of half-arsed experts in. They need a little, they need some volume to get going, and with the smaller houses, it's.
Get volunteers or something?
Excuse me?
You get volunteers?
Volunteers. What is that?
Volunteers for the effluent.
Oh. I don't know which conjures up a worse thought, that or the communal hot tub. But I guess the thought is, if conceptually, I didn't want to go through drawing up the buffer and coming up with the systems, and if the board wasn't conceptually okay with this. So that's really what I'm here to ask, if we can go forward with this.
Huge piece of property.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of property, it really is. And again, I think if we have a covenant that keeps this house at 8,700 square feet, so long as we can maintain this, the density on the property is even more controlled than it would be if the original variance was executed on, which had an unlimited main house. So it sounds like it's okay if I go forward and get you the buffer, and unless there's any objections to this conceptually.
He was just here.
Well, we're not in the wet.
It's not in the wetlands jurisdiction.
Oh, we're not in the
Yeah,
wetlands, okay.
yeah. I would be offering that even though I kept the stuff out of the wetlands jurisdiction.
But you will have a buffer.
A 25-foot, vegetated buffer down there.
Do you have any other questions?
There's none now.
Anyone from the public?
Very quick, Eric Braden, Carl Fritz, Kareem and Tina Semi, who live, as John said, just to the north. John really described our understanding that we reached. That was the clients got on well together. John and I, of course, never do, but they did. And I've just put our agreement in a letter, which I'd submit to and leave it at that, unless you have any questions.
You mean that jokingly, I hope.
I do.
Take it outside.
Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard? No? Therefore, I think we should close it.
I would suggest, if John wants to provide this, any further documentation, how long would you suggest you need?
I would respectfully request if you could close except for a written submission. I don't think there's any need for any
I think you need to provide the board with a copy of what your buffer plan that you offered.
Absolutely.
And also a response, I guess, to the question on the innovative systems.
Yep. I think it's fair to say we'll probably end up just offering it on the first one because of the size complications and the number, but I'll go back and ask. I think that's a fair question.
So we can close it for written?
Written submissions, I guess the question would be, how soon do you think you could get them?
As long as I can get, as quickly as I can get someone to draw a buffer plan. So hopefully that'll be before the,
If you don't have it for next month, the month after.
just kick it over. Yeah. But I should be able to get someone to draw that within, before the work session.
Work session.
I hope so. Oh, and we'll have, yes, we'll have our agreement with the trees and all that
Okay.
taken care of. Yes. And if not, I'll ask for an adjournment.
That should be reflected on the plan. You're asking for trees or something?
What we're going to try to
Trees
do is
instead.
there's some really beautiful London plane and sycamore trees that I think for everyone's benefit should be preserved. Eric's client was concerned about them.
So you're expecting that to be a condition of
Yeah, that's fine.
approval? Is that what you're looking for?
Yep.
Take this thing out and replace it.
I'm sorry
Well,
if I
I
didn't
move
make
we
that clear.
close this subject to written evidence.
So moved. I mean,
Yeah,
yes.
so moved. I have a second?
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Wait, I didn't make that.
Well, nice
Oh,
one.
good morning. Thank you.
When I get home now, I can't sleep.
I know.
I can go sit and have a glass of wine and watch TV, and I still won't sleep.
They're all still losing.
Good night.
Brings us up to case number 2976, Life Storage, 99 Mariners Drive.
introduce our affidavit of posting and certified mailings. Tom will landscape with Greenman Peterson out of the Rochester office. Bob was here earlier out of our Badwater office. And today I have with me Tim McVitie from Life Storage out of Buffalo. This is a relatively simple application that we're proposing today relative to the variance request in comparison with some, well, relative to some of the things we've heard earlier today. Okay. We have Life Storage, just in general, real quickly here, is going through a national upgrade relative to their facilities, looking to provide additional climate-controlled space at a number of their facilities throughout the country, which is being demanded by the clients that are utilizing the facilities. Here in Southampton, they're looking to do the same thing relative to it. We put together an original plan, a concept plan that we met with the building department with. The concept plan was 230 feet by 42 feet, around 100 square feet. Sat down with them. They pointed, with that plan, we met the dimensional requirements associated with setbacks and such, but they pointed out the issue relative to percentage of the lot coverage. Here's an updated plans for lot coverage was over the 25%, and noted that the board has never considered a variance over that 25%, to the best of their knowledge, and highly recommended that we reconsider that and minimize the associated variance being proposed or being requested. So went back to the drawing board, looked at our application, tried to get under that 25% lot coverage number, which we did. We compared that. We came up with a building footprint of 197 by 42 feet, which is 8,274 feet, which exceeds the 7,500 square foot maximum for a two-story structure on the site. As you can see on the plan is what we have submitted here and have noted in the original application. We have two structures on the site that are over that amount that were pre-existing. The purchase of this property had been there for years associated with it. One of 9,359 square feet and the other of 9,526 square feet. So we're looking to construct a new facility for that 8,274 square feet, thus requesting a minor variance of 10% approximately from the 7,500 maximum allowed on this site versus the 82. This isn't an industrial zone associated with it. It's really no impact associated with any of our neighbors. It's a well-run facility. We're looking to upgrade the office facilities and provide an efficient space. The size requirement, we've gone through a number of iterations associated to getting to this point, and the economics associated with demolishing the three buildings and constructing this building. It's really the minimum size building that we can construct and be economically viable associated with the capital improvements in constructing this.
Is there an issue with parking? Somebody pointed out there were a lot of cars parked there in that picture that we had last time.
Yeah, up in front right now, there's rentable parking spaces that are
Sir,
there.
could you come to the podium and identify yourself?
Yeah, Tim McVitie with Life Storage. Right now, as you can kind of see from the plan, there are rentable spaces up front currently. With the new design, when we finalize our site plan, those would be eliminated. And they would be customer parking spaces to access the office and the new climate control building. There would not be rentable parking spaces up front anymore.
In addition, it could be a perceived issue also of parking within the right-of-way for the landscaping businesses and the workers that do park within that right-of-way along that cul-de-sac in front of it, which we have no control of. We are looking as part of the site plan process to, right now we have 3 entrances going into the site to minimize or eliminate one of those entrances, improve the frontage, the gates and fencing around it, and take out the fencing in front because it will be a key card getting into that building, so you will not require fencing to the front of the new building coming into the site. And that will be unrestricted associated with that.
So you have one entry off of Mariner Drive,
Well,
and where are the other two? Off of County Road 39?
Currently, there's three off Mariner Drive technically, right now.
Oh, I'm just looking where it comes in, just off Mariner Drive.
Oh, correct.
It goes in as one, then it opens up into three.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
There's multiple businesses off of Mariner Drive besides us.
Oh, yeah. So you don't have any exit or entrance that goes on onto County Road 39?
No.
I'd like one, but.
I don't know, that's kind of iffy.
Yeah, exactly.
Trying to get out of the jitney stop there is pretty tough sometimes. You're trying to turn left.
That's fine.
You got anything?
Nope.
Mark?
Nope.
Wayne, anything else?
Yeah, I have some questions for you, gentlemen. Number one, I'm looking at your plans, and I see the survey that you're using is from 2002. Is there a current up-to-date survey?
Well, that was an Alta survey done when they purchased the property associated with it and haven't made any improvements. Once we get beyond this point, we were looking to update the survey for final site plan designs and process that with the planning.
Well, that goes to my next question. Have you been to the planning board on a pre-application or not?
The building department recommended we come to you first.
Okay, and the property split between both the town and the village. This plan that you show has all the town dimensional requirements, doesn't indicate anything about the village and what the village portions are. The question that is raised here is your existing square footage, are they one-story buildings?
Two-story.
They're all, the three buildings that you're seeking to replace are two-story?
Correct. Yeah, the office is two-story. The building to the left is two-story with a basement. The building to the right of the office is two-story.
You're going to have a basement, first floor and second floor though, right?
This building will have a basement, first and second floor.
What's the square footage?
So the question that is related to a planning question is you're increasing the floor area and maybe some units. Is there a change in the parking requirement, and is that being accommodated on the site, or you need any variances related to off-street parking?
With this plan, we'd actually be increasing the amount of customer parking that is currently there.
Well, I guess the question is, though, the code doesn't make a distinction between customer and others. It's just off-street parking. So the question is, you know, what is the current requirement? In other words, what was approved by the planning board? Do you have a copy of the approved site plan, original site plan?
Not with us tonight, but we will get that, and
I think we need to look at that to see how, what you're showing here, you have a 2002 survey, I would assume is an as-built survey that's supposed to reflect what was approved. And hopefully there's no changes, and that's the question here, you know, 15 years later, has there been any changes? That's why this board, as well as the planning board, needs an up-to-date survey. But the question going from there is there any other relief that you might need based on what that original site plan approved?
based on our review of the ordinance and discussions with the building department, we don't believe we need any additional relief anywhere associated with it. It's just the lot coverage.
Storage isn't typically a use that requires a lot of parking. There's no...
It's not the question, though. The code has a specific requirement. There's a table that tells you how many parking spaces are required for every use, every commercial use, and here it's probably based on square footage of storage area. You know, 1 per 1,000 or whatever the number is. I don't have the code in front of me, but when the original site plan was approved, there was that requirement, and that's where the required number of spaces. So here, if you're actually increasing floor area, there's probably some off-street parking component to that. And if the original site plan was right on the number, you need to show an increase in parking. So we just need to know that all that is going to be in compliance so that there's no issues.
Overall, though, we're actually reducing the amount of units. So there technically would be less customers on this property. We're reducing the number.
Square footage on the floor.
Correct, I understand that, but I'm saying overall, right now, with the amount of customers that possibly could come into the property, with this new building, because we're putting in larger units, because of the need, we would actually have overall less customers.
I think we're going to have to see the numbers, though. What's required and what you've got. And when you did ask them to get a new survey, right?
Well, it's my understanding it's been your policy and practice to have a current up-to-date survey, and I know the planning board will insist on it as well. The survey that you're showing is from 2002.
I think we need a new one. Need an updated
Even though there
survey.
hasn't been a change.
Yeah,
We don't know that.
that's why we have to see it.
You know, that's what a surveyor would show.
We have a
is-
decision that's going to be based on that survey.
But more importantly, your starting point, it was supposed to be what was approved by the planning board, both the town and the village, and whatever the number of parking spaces, the location, any kind of screening, buffers, all those factors are supposed to be, and that should match, currently match. And then the question is, by your proposed changes, are there any other requirements? And typically, if you're adding floor area, parking requirement is not by number of units necessarily. I believe it's based on square footage. So you want to just make sure that you have enough parking. And all we're trying to do is make sure that when you're here in front of us, you get all the relief that you're asking for, and you don't have to come back because something was forgotten. The other thing I just want to remind the board is because this is split between the village and the town, we need to verify whether we have made a referral to the Suffolk County Planning Commission, as well as the town planning board. I don't know if that's been done.
I don't know either.
So I think as a minimum, we should, I think we should, yeah, we should at least make the referral, but I would think we would want to have you come back with that survey.
And the numbers on the parking.
Of course, all those elements, but I think you need to start with what the existing approved site plan is to make sure you're in compliance with what was approved originally.
Well, I think we understand that you don't need as much parking as some people do for the actual need.
Correct, and we run into that a lot in a lot of municipalities, is that there's no technical numbers for self-storage. It falls under warehouse, but warehouse has employees. We have 2 employees on the site. It's transient people coming in and out.
It's not a bunch of dentists.
Exactly.
No, and I think the point is if you need relief on the parking, I think in this kind of use, the board, if
would grant it.
is going to grant it.
Exactly.
I think they would be inclined to do that here based on what you can present to us, but until, we don't know right now if you need that relief.
So you want to know what we have to do, and in order to do that, we need this information.
Can I ask the board for an opinion or any objection to what we're proposing today?
No problems
I
here.
don't think we're against it. The area is what it is.
Exactly.
Is there anyone from the public like to be heard to this application? No. So we're just going to hold this one open then.
I think you should hold it open, and I'd be happy to talk to you guys, but I think we all need to do a little research to figure out what was approved, because the property is also split between the town and the village, so there's probably 2 site plan approvals floating around out there. We want to make sure that it's coordinated. But nonetheless, I will ask the building department to make the referral to the planning commission and the town planning board, because it is on split between the village and the town.
Right.
We adjourn for all purposes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And that brings us down to 2977. The gentleman's been waiting patiently all evening. First Coastal. On the application of case number 2977, Hildegard Herford, 547 Meadow Lane.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Aram Tertunian, First Coastal Corporation, West Hampton Beach, New York, on behalf of the applicant Hildegard Herford. We come before you tonight to request permission for the construction of a dock on this property. The property is located at 547 Meadow Lane. You may recall, if you have a really good memory, that we came before this board a number of years ago to elevate the house in response to repeated flooding events. I'm very pleased to report that with this board's assistance in getting a wetlands permit, that the elevation is complete and the house is 8 feet higher. And
Is sort of stucco?
yes, and that was a very successful venture, and we'd like to make this one successful as well. I have to apologize for two things this evening. Number one, that the reason we're coming in front of you is because we were building the dock when we were informed by the building inspector that we needed a approval from this board. So this dock is, for all intents and purposes, constructed. The second thing is I didn't bring the requisite number of copies of everything, but I can make those available to you. I thought that the permits that we had gotten were submitted with our application. Apparently, they were not. I apologize for those two things. That's all. So in the application package in front of you is a request for a 113-foot catwalk that is then has a dock ramp and float, a ramp and float at the end. And there's this site plan contained within your package that describes that. I'm handing it to you now the 3 permits that we did receive from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the Southampton Town Trustees. So our negligence in coming here was inadvertent. We obviously intended to get all the approvals we believed to be necessary. The dock itself, in reviewing it under the standards that are typically established by the New York State DEC, contains all of the elements that they have in their guidelines, which are, number 1, there's no treated material. Number 2, it's elevated over the marsh. Number 3, the decking itself consists of the through-flow decking to allow at least 50% light penetration. And the fact that the DEC and the other agencies that have issued the permit speaks to the environmental compatibility of the dock on this location. I'd just like to point out for the board's information that if you go, this is located basically at the very east end of Shinnecock Bay, Peggy Creek, Taylor Creek area. And if you go from Halsey Neck Lane to Road I, which is, we're just about in the middle of that. There are 7 docks there, 4 of them to the east and 3 of them to the west. And we fall basically in the middle. The properties on either side have similar dock structures. And so we, from an environmental point of view and from a neighborhood point of view, we believe we meet all the requirements that this board would normally desire.
You get into deep water there?
Yeah, we got to 2.5 feet of water.
We've done this before in Hetty Creek, haven't we?
Well, this is Taylor, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost.
Gonna have a small boat there or something?
Yeah, it's just one little Boston whaler type, get around the bay.
Get out to Shinnecock Bay.
Get out to Shinnecock Bay, do a little clamming. And they can see their boat from the deck of the elevated house now.
Swell. So it's not quite across from the reservation, is it? It's down
No,
further east.
it's further east.
And it's already in place.
That's all I got.
Was there an extra copy of the permits?
No, I apologize. There is only one copy of the full set of permits. And I can...
You could email them to my office
Yes.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Do you have a DEC permit there?
Should
You
be
know what it is? What it is?
No, I looked at what I was...
Three different
but we're
permits.
missing.
Yeah, there's 3 different ones.
I didn't hold anything back.
Kevin may have it.
You didn't say you did, Mark.
You want something, Chick?
If you want to hear from, Wayne and I have been discussing this.
Yeah.
And a couple of things. I mean, just when I opened up the plans, I noticed a couple of things. There are 2 different plans. One is a survey, one is the first coastal plan. They have 2 different wetlands locations and also plot mean low water and mean high water. And the wetlands line appears to be landward of mean high water. So what I'd like to do is get an accurate wetlands line, but if it turns out that the line is in the vicinity of where it shows on the survey from 2009, it's very possible that this is not subject to our jurisdiction. And just to clarify that, and Wayne and I will confer further, but the regulated area in the code is the area within 150 feet of the boundary of a wetland for any structure or building, or the area within 200 feet for septic and within 125 feet for landscaping. So in fact, if everything is seaward of the wetland line, I don't think it would be a regulated area based on the black and white text of the code. So once we get that wetland line, if it turns out that everything is seaward of that, I don't think there would be any jurisdiction. If there's any activity that occurs landward of that line, then there would be. And I don't know if that might involve access or paths or any activity through that upland area. If it turns out that the wetland line is coincident with mean high water, then a small amount of the dock would be within jurisdiction. And that's been consistent with how this board has interpreted these types of permits in the past, that we typically don't regulate the actual structure in the area where the town's trustees grant permits, as well as DEC and Army Corps, but we look at the buffer and the approach to those structures. So I think, as I said, I'd like to get an accurate, up-to-date wetland line, and then based on that, revisit the regulated area and the jurisdiction itself. Did you want to add something,
I would concur
Wayne?
with Mr. Voorhees. The question I understand is this dock is already in place, so it would be important to update your survey to show it. And if it shows the wetland line, I think this board could either say that we have no jurisdiction for the reasons Mr. Voorhees indicated, or that unless the board has concerns, I believe that what you've seen would qualify for the wetland special permit otherwise. But I think it's just a matter of, for the record, and I think this is what the building department, why they sent you here, is to make sure we documented what you've done. So I think that's what you need to do, is if you can get us just that updated survey showing where the dock is currently, and the wetland line information for check, I think we could either make a determination it's not within the jurisdiction, or if it is, then if the board's inclined to have a decision, grant the permit.
We're very happy to have the survey updated to reflect those conditions. Would request that you close the hearing tonight, except for the written submission, which we will get to you by your work session, which I believe is at the 17th. Does that sound right?
Correct.
I wrote that down somewhere.
It is.
Okay, I move we close the decision except for written submissions.
Second.
Well, we didn't ask.
Decision or determination?
Is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak? No, okay, now you can do it.
Do it again.
Do it again.
I forget.
You forgot.
No, I move we close the decision except for written.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you and good evening.
Take care, Harold.
I move that the July 2017 meeting of the Southampton Village Zoning Board of Appeals be closed.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.